Hey everyone, Ekman here with another video, and today we're going to talk about Disney's new trading card game, Lorcana, which should be dropping this August here in North America. It's a really interesting card game based on just the fact that it's a really big IP. Disney hasn't really made a trading card game before, and Ravensburg, who essentially they've contracted out to make their trading card game, really hasn't either. They're really kind of big in the board game space, and so kind of the first foray for both of them. But since it's Disney, obviously there's a lot of eyes on this. Obviously, there's a lot of fans of strictly just anything Disney related, and we do have the rules for this game as well, kind of unofficially. It was for as far as I know, like a pamphlet they're giving out for a future event later this month. Someone took some pictures and put them online, so we finally have some idea of how the game works and just kind of how the cards work and everything else. So we're going to go over the rules, or at least like what the pamphlet has said what the rules are for this game, as well as we're going to reevaluate not all of them, but some of the cards that have already been dropped for this card game with the new rules and everything kind of recalibrated there, and it should be a lot of fun. So with also just my opinion on top, and if you guys don't know who I am, I'm a content creator for a bunch of card games, mostly Bandai card games, so the Dragon Ball Super, Digimon, One Piece, and newly or soon to be released Battle Spirit Saga card game as well. So that's mostly what my channel is, but been making content for card games for like 5 years now, and I just have a kind of idea of how card games work, and just kind of comparing them to those card games. Probably also comparisons to Magic, Yu-Gi-Oh, and Pokemon, the big three for card games. I know how they work. I don't make content for them regularly, but that's kind of something, a good starting point for a lot of people, and we're going to make some comparisons there. So should be fun, and I'm ready to jump on into it. So first off, real quick, the overview for this game. So in this game, you race to locate pieces of lore scattered across Lorcana and collect them for safekeeping. So that's what the kind of the lore about Lorcana. But essentially how this game works is you have to get to 20 points first, and by doing that you get 20 lore, which is your kind of your point system, and essentially your cards that you're able to summon on the board have ways to gain the lore throughout the game, and that's kind of the way. It's kind of like the reverse of, like, instead of having to do like 20 damage to your opponent, you have to earn 20 points. So it's kind of back and forth, kind of just different ways to think about it. Most card games I play don't really kind of have that system. Pokemon's like the one that's kind of similar, at least currently running in my mind, where you have to get 6 points, but that's kind of like a different like life system in a lot of ways. So and traditionally, like the other Bandai card games, a lot of them based on how much life you have left, and those life are kind of cards. But for this card game, it's more of just trying to accrue points, and it doesn't seem like you get any benefits or anything negative for getting closer to 20 points. You just try to race there as well. And to set up this game, you have to have some damage counters, because that's kind of the system. Works kind of similar to how it works in Pokemon as well. You shuffle your deck, you set your tracker to 0, you draw 7 cards, you can look at your cards, and then you can also, there is a mulligan, as you see here in the altering your hand part. So before the game starts, each player can alter their starting hand one time, beginning with the first player. What if they, you do it if your hand's bad. To do this, put any number of cards from your hand to the bottom of your deck, and then draw up, and then you shuffle your deck again. So kind of like a modified kind of mulligan, kind of similar to how it works in Dragon Ball. Dragon Ball, you do shuffle and then draw up again, so you can draw the same cards. But this is probably like one of the most consistent ways to draw and like have a mulligan in a game like this. Like Digimon, it's like a full mulligan, but you draw 5, and then, or you shuffle and then you draw 5. One Piece, same thing with that, and BSS essentially has a similar thing. So I think mulligans in games are pretty common and should moderately be the standard moving forward. So pretty safe pick there. And then you don't draw going first, essentially. So nothing too out of the ordinary, and pretty basic there. But the first big thing is like the card overview. So we've been seeing all these cards, we've been seeing all these symbols and everything else with it, but we don't really have any idea. We don't have a clear idea for some of these. So we do have finally this breakdown. So parts of the cards cost that's pretty self-explanatory. Cost 4 to play. 4 ink specifically is the name of the resource in this game. The inkwell icon means that you can use it as ink. We'll talk about it a little bit more for that one. Name, and also like it has like usually like a a category like underneath it. So this is Mickey Mouse, the Wayward Sorcerer. There's other Mickey Mouses in this card game, which is should not be very surprising for you there. Classifications, kind of like traits and stuff, which I'm sure some of those will come into play later. And then also the ink, which symbol it belongs to. In this card game, you can only have 2 different colors of ink, essentially. So when you look at the ink key right here, we have amber, emerald, sapphire, amethyst, ruby, and steel. So you can't just put any cards. You can only choose up to essentially 2 colors. And then abilities, which we'll kind of break into a little bit later. We also do have the strength icon, which is how much essential damage it deals whenever it challenges. Willpower, which is essentially the max amount of health a character has, and then also the lore value. So this one's the lore value is something that's newer to this. We've seen that these like little diamond-like shapes have been existing on cards, but we don't really have like a clear indication for it. So we'll talk about it a little bit later, but when this card generates lore, which is our victory points or kind of end goal thing, this card generates 2 essentially, right? So that's kind of like the 3 different kind of stats for a character, for pretty much how much it costs, how much damage it can deal, how much health it can have, and then also how much lore it can generate every time you need to generate that. So that's the kind of idea for that there. And then there's obviously like a rarity system. So this is a character card, but we do have different types of cards in the game as well. So these are the ones that exist right now into it. So we have characters, again, like Cruella de Vil, which we talked about there. We have items. So these stay in play after they happen. So it's kind of like a permanent, kind of like an artifact, I believe in Magic is what they're called, and that kind of thing. So this can be something you get to use every turn. So for example, we have a Dingle Hopper here we'll learn it later, but for every turn, once a turn, you can use it to remove a damage from something. So really good for like making sure that your characters are staying healthy and stay on the board a little bit longer. Then we have actions, which are kind of like magics. They're kind of like events. They're kind of like everything else that we have, options and that kind of stuff, extra cards in Dragon Ball. So essentially just non-permanent. And something that I've noticed too, these don't have like the little inkwell circle thing, which we'll talk about a little bit more, but it looks like traditionally you cannot use action cards to build your ink, essentially, or your resource. So like lands in Dragon Ball in Magic are energy in Dragon Ball Super. And real quick, just looking over it, this really looks like it's leaning more to kind of a Magic system. And truthfully, there's a lot that reminds me of like Dragon Ball in a lot of ways. There's a lot of like kind of Dragon Ball-esque mechanics, including the fact that you can seemingly use most cards in your deck as like your ink, as your resource, instead of just like in Magic where it's specifically land cards. But anyway, we'll talk about that a little bit more. But actions are just kind of one-shot effects. So Dragonfire for 5, you get to just banish, which is the same as like KO, delete. It's essentially just putting the card into the discard pile so it doesn't exist on the board anymore. So there's also these songs as well. So songs are a type of action you can use. You can play once just like other actions, but instead of paying the cost of, for example, 2 right here, you can use you can pay its cost by tapping or exhausting or whatever you want to call it in this game for the same cost. So this specifically says if I move my head out of the way, a character with a cost of 2 or more can tap to play the song for free, of where you put the top card of your deck into your inkwell face down and exerted. So exerted is the tapping word for this game, but essentially this lets you ramp or get 1 more up, and then instead of using the 2 ink to get there, you can instead just tap something that costs 2 or more, essentially. So my guess is that most of these are going to have the same cost of whatever the action is. So the song is cost 2, so that means that anything's 2 or less. Generically, there will probably be exceptions to that, but the idea is that, you know, if you want to ramp more or be more energy efficient, or sorry, ink efficient, you can do that there. So brief overview of what the cards are there. And now that we understand how the cards work in this game, let's kind of go to what the basic loop of gameplay is. So playing the game in general, a turn is divided into 2 parts. Each player takes their whole turn before passing the turn to the next player, and you have to take these steps in order, at least for the beginning phase. So where you ready everything, you set, which means that any effects that say like beginning of your turn happen at this point, and then you draw your card at the end of the beginning phase. And then we go into our main phase, and this is kind of just like I like to call it like a nebulous main phase where you can just do anything you want in the order that you want it, and I think that's really cool. Dragon Ball Super does this, Digimon does this, and One Piece as well, where you can do any combination of playing a card, attack with something else. Like you get to do the order that you want to do, and I think that just makes it, ups the complexity in a really healthy game, and you're not really restricted to what orders that you kind of have to do. Kind of like like Yu-Gi-Oh kind of has like specifically main phase, battle phase, main phase 2 kind of stuff, and like Magic has like their own kind of attack step kind of stuff. And Pokemon, like you attack at the end of your turn, right? That ends your turn after you attack. This lets you just do like your own combination of plays, which is really nice. So once per turn, you can put a face down card in your inkwell at any time. Dragon Ball Super has to be like strictly like its beginning phase, charge phase, which you put a card into your energy, which is the ink, and then you get the rest of your main phase. This is just any time. So that just means like if you're not sure what card you want to put into your ink at the beginning of your turn, or you know that you're going to be drawing cards later, so you have a better idea of what cards you have to play and everything. I think that's really strong, and that's like the big thing about Dragon Ball Super. I don't really like, it's kind of balanced around it nowadays, but it kind of stinks like you have to charge at the beginning of your turn because it's just so easy to forget that step, especially when you're like newer. But there's that. But also, additionally, we can play a card, use a character ability that doesn't require them to exert, use an item ability, take an action with a character that's been in play since the start of your turn, and so essentially, cards have what's Magic players call summoning sickness, which means that the turn they're played, they need to take a turn just to set up, or in this game, let the ink dry, and then the next turn you get to use their abilities. There are some abilities and stuff you can just do with a card that's just been played, but by and large, if you have to do anything that turns it sideways, you can't turn it sideways until the start of your next turn. But this means questing, this means challenging an opponent's exerted character or using an ability that requires them to exert. And real quick, for what exerting means in this game, it's tapping in Magic, and it's suspending, it's resting in Dragon Ball Super, anything you want to say to turn it sideways. And in general, in card games, if it's something sideways, it means that its ability has been used, and you can't use the abilities again until you start your turn and ready it again. But that's essentially what the tap symbol is. Pretty standard for anyone who's played any card games based on that resource. That's how it is. So I'm probably going to say tap based on force of habit, but exert is what this card game uses to kind of signify that. But going into what our inkwell is, which is just what our mana pool, our energy, or our dawn cards from One Piece. Your inkwell is where you'll put your ink cards face down. You will use the cards in your inkwell to pay the cost of cards you play for your hand. You may put a card from your hand into your inkwell once per turn, but again, it's any time during your main phase. The card you must choose has the inkwell icon around the corner, and the top will show a card in a second. The more ink cards, the more you'll be able to use. To put a card in your inkwell, show the card to your opponent and then put it face down your inkwell as ink. Every card in your inkwell represents one, no matter what the front, and choose wisely. Cards put in your inkwell stay there for the rest of the game. Once you put a card in your inkwell, nothing about the front matters, including its cost, ink type, etc. So, and real quick, so to kind of signify that, the types of cards here. So you'll see here for like Corella de Vil and the Dingle Hopper, they have like the little wreath around the number there, so that kind of signifies that it can be put in your inkwell, and that's why you show your opponent that it's a legal target for it. And then you have the Dragonfire and Jump Ahead. Both of these are action cards, and so they don't have the wreath around them, which means that you can't put them into your inkwell. I kind of understand, like, I'm back and forth of like putting it face down, which is kind of weird because like then, like, I don't know, you're going to show your opponent the card anyways, and I'm pretty sure you can see what cards are underneath it, but it's kind of weird that it is face down. It's probably just to clarify that this card is not in play and that it's ink and that you can't use any of the abilities for it. Additionally, in like games like Dragon Ball Super and like Magic, where the color of the card that generates resources is important because it generates a specific color of resource, this game doesn't really care about that. It just generates one ink, right? So because of that as well, you don't really care about the color of the card that's in there. So that makes a bit of a difference for you there. So it's fine for what it is. Not a big deal that it's face down. I'm just used to everything being face up for that kind of stuff. But it's fine for what it is. So that's kind of how you generate your resources. And so you generally, once per turn, you get one more card there, which generates you resources there. Also, something interesting, most of the card games that I play that use this idea that you can use cards as energy or as your resource generator, so ink in this card game, you generally have a way to draw more cards throughout the games, because every time you draw a card, you have to put one essentially into your ink every turn just to kind of keep the pace for it. And in Dragon Ball Super, the way that you do that is that you, every time you take damage, you essentially draw a card. And One Piece is the same way, more or less, but like also the Dawn cards are what you have like a separate deck for it, so you always guarantee to hit your curve. It's a little interesting in this game where there's not inherently, it looks like a way to draw cards outside of cards that just simply say that. But anyways, using abilities for this card game. Many items and characters have abilities you can use during your turn and only during your turn. These normally affect other cards in play. Cards in a player's deck, discard, hand, or inkwell aren't in play, so they aren't affected by other cards unless the cards say otherwise. If a card ability has a cost that appears before its effect when the two separated by a dash, if a card ability has a cost that appears before its effect with the two separated by a dash. So the cost may include an exert cost, an ink cost, text that explains the cost, or a combination of these. We'll go over these as well. Actually, I think we can go back right here. So, for example, the abilities for the Strain and Tear right here, it has the exert symbol. So to use the effect, you exert it. And there we go. So that's kind of how that works. And then they have an example here for Beast Mirror as well. So you get to draw a card for paying 4, essentially. So, or three ink and 1 there. So interesting that they have like an example here, but they had like the Dingle Hopper ready for it, but whatever, because I don't think we've seen what that card does. And then to end the game, the first player to reach 20 lore or more wins. If your deck runs out of cards you lose the next time, you would have to draw a card as well. So similar to a lot of other card games too. And then the questing and challenging kind of way this game works too. So playing a card, we've kind of talked about it, but you have a Lorcana card in your inkwell. You tap it or you exert it for 1. It generates 1 resource there. When you play a character card put on the table above your inkwell, characters enter play in ready, but you can't do anything with them until your next turn. Again, you have to wait for the ink to dry. And when you play an item card put on the table above your inkwell, unlike characters, you can use these right away. And when you play an action card, you do what it does, and then you put it in a discard pile afterwards. We already talked about it for songs, but essentially the same thing where it's an action card, but you can, instead of paying the cost regularly with ink, you can use it by exerting your character cards as well. And it says also, because it's a little confusing, rules for when you can exert a character still apply, of course. So characters that can't sing songs the same turn they come into play. So you can't play something for 2, and then you can't use like the song to exert it for 2 to do that. So just the consistency there is nice. Questing, the quest with one of your characters, exert them and gain lore equal to their lore value. Remember, you can't quest the character the same turn you play them. So, for example, the Corella de Vil, you can exert it to get 1 lore point, essentially. And then challenging, questing is how you win the game, but sometimes you need to slow your opponent down. This is where challenging comes in. First, exert one of your characters to send them into the challenge, then choose an opponent's exerted character to challenge. You can't challenge a ready character also, so it's only cards that are exerted. Both strength and a challenge deal damage, so attacking or defending, you do damage to both, and then look at each character's strength and put that many damage counters on it. And additionally, damage counters are very similar to how it is in Pokemon, where you take damage and then it keeps that damage until it gets removed. It's not something that's refreshed at the start of your turn or like at the end of your turn or anything like that. It has that damage forever until it gets removed from the game or something else like that. So that's just kind of how it works. Cards have like a health character. So they have a little example here. Captain Hook has 3 strength and Donald Duck has 2. They challenge each other. So this gives 3 damage to Donald, and Donald will do 2 back. Since Donald has a health of 3, or willpower of 3, Donald will get banished and then get sent to the discard pile. Meanwhile, Captain Hook will take the 2 damage. He'll go down from 4 willpower to essentially 2. So you have your 2 little tokens there to explain that. And but he'll be able to stay on the board until he takes 2 more damage. So pretty much just the example of how that works and everything. So pretty understood there. And I know a lot of people are wondering if you heal up at the start or end of each turn, or if there's a way, or if it's just persistent, and it is a persistent system for that one. And then lastly, just kind of just the finaling part of it. So they say that you can do multiplayer, which is interesting, especially since like it's instead of like your opponent gets they lose health since it's the first to get to X amount of points. I think that does lend itself to more of like alternative like 3 or 4 player games as well, since everyone's just trying to get the same amount of numbers instead of where you can like you don't want your friend Tim to win, so you and your friend Carl can both just only attack Tim. It's more of like, since you're trying to generate points, you can kind of work together to make someone else not get their points. I can see like being more back and forth and lend itself more to that. And then just building deck rules. Obviously, we don't have enough cards to build a deck, but you have to have at least 60 cards in it. You can't have more than 4 copies of a single card, but you can have like different names for it. So it's like character numbers. So example, you can't have more than 4 copies of Elsa, Snow Queen in your deck. Different versions of a character count as different cards. So you can have 4 copies of Snow Queen as well as 4 copies of Queen's Regent as well. And you can only contain cards from 1 or 2 inks. So we saw the colors of the cards and the inks as well. So you can only have up to 2. You can have a solo 1 color one as well, but I haven't really seen anything so far, and I could have missed it, that generally says that something only affects 1 color, but there's that. And then turn order, which we're kind of already talked about, and this is like a really handy, like strictly if you need to know how the turn order goes and put it on a playmat, there it is there. So that is the entirety of the pamphlet, and let's quickly go over some cards that we know exist as it is and just kind of go over them now that we kind of know how the rules really work for this card game. We're going to look at the cards from the Disney Expo just based on now knowing what the rules are. So for example, this is Captain Hook. He's a 1-drop and he is a 1/2, so 1 strength and 2 willpower. And then he has an effect called Challenger. So +2, when challenging, this character gets +2 on the strength. So that just means that if you are trying to get rid of something, this can attack into it for 3. If this was being challenged, if someone was attacking into Captain Hook, he'd only have 1 strength. But if he's trying to remove a different character, he'd have 3 strength. So really kind of neat way to get removal. And then he also has 1 lore, so if you try to go questing with him, he gets 1 lore point. So kind of understood from there. Then we also have Elsa, Snow Queen. So this is a 3-drop with a 2 strength and 3 willpower. Has the effect freeze to exert chosen opposing character. So this could be really nice for like another way to get rid of a card. So if you have an opponent's card that you want to get rid of, you can use the freeze effect on here. And then for example, you can attack with the Captain Hook. And since the Captain Hook is a 3 when challenging, that can be very strong there. So being able to find a target that you want to try to get rid of so you can interact with it and exert it is really cool there. Additionally too, so since this is a freeze ability, you're not able to use this effect the turn it comes into play. This would be a live effect after you play it based on the rules of the game. We also have Cruella de Vil, which we saw in the pamphlet, but it's a 1/3 for 2. It's a You Will Be Sorry. So when this character is challenged and banished, so if you are trying to get rid of this card, for example, this has 1 strength and 3 willpower. And let's say we have our Captain Hook that's attacking on into it because it will have 3 when challenging. You may return chosen character to their player's hand. The wording for this one's a little tricky, so this might mean you get to choose any card on the board and return it to the player's hand, which can be helpful potentially for your own cards as well, or get rid of a card that your opponent is like really troublesome to get rid of. So both these effects seem really strong. It looks like, again, it's only when your opponent tries to actively get rid of this card, which means that this could also just be a really great way to passively get 1 lore every turn, because your opponent wouldn't want to traditionally interact with this card because they could get tempoed out of one of their bigger cards, because it doesn't look like there's a cost restriction for the returning back to hand either, which is nice. We also have Robin Hood. So this is a 6 cost. It is a 4/4, has the effect of Feed the Poor. When you play this card, if an opponent has more cards in their hand than you get to draw a card, which is nice. And then also Good Shot. During your turn, if this character has evasive, this can challenge characters with evasive. So this seems like a stealth-like mechanic as well. So we'll look into it. We have like a Mickey Mouse card later, but this just means that you're evasive half the time, which means you can strictly attack into cards with evasive, but this card doesn't have evasive either, so anything can attack into this, but this card can specifically attack into cards with the evasive technique. And it looks like cards with evasive too are really nice for gathering lore because they seem like they have a harder time with your opponent interacting with them, but this Robin Hood would be able to help get rid of those, which is really nice. Then we have this Stitch here, the Rockstar. So shift for 4, you can play this on top one of your Stitch characters, and so generically, like based on what the rules are, the big name is what the name of the character is, and then the bottom is kind of more like the variant, I would say, of the character. So you could play this, I'm guessing, on top of your own stitch, like on top of itself, if you would want to do that for some reason. But it's for 6 cost, it's a 3 strength and 5 willpower. Adoring Fans is the effect when you play a character with a cost of 2 or less, you may exert it to draw a card, which I would assume you can do that on the turn you're playing. It kind of conflicts with some of the rules mechanics we've already said, but that just means like you get to draw a card, which seems to be very valuable in this card game based on how we're seeing the effects real quickly. And so it just means like you can get rid of it. So for example, I could see this being really good with, you play the Corella de Vil for 2, you get to exert it to draw a card, and then that also means that your opponent really wouldn't want to get rid of it because then they'd have to bounce something back to their hand, right? So that seems great. And then this also has a 3 for its lore there. We also have the Mickey Mouse. So this is just a 5/5 for 8, and which then also has evasive. So you can get 4 lore every turn with this card, and your opponent's probably going to have a harder time to get rid of this unless they have a bunch of their own evasive cards as well. So that's kind of nice there. And then lastly, we do have Maleficent, the Monstrous Dragon, which is a 9 cost, which is the highest cost I've seen in this card game. It's a 7/5 and it has Dragonfire. Whenever you play this character, you may banish chosen opposing character. So it is very costly, but being able to just get rid of anything is strong. And it's, being able to get rid of something on play, which means that most of these effects, you have to wait a turn for them to kick in because of just how the exerting mechanic and everything else works in this game. Being able to immediately get rid of something, any card that's a threat, seems really nice. So, for example, if your opponent played a Mickey Mouse either their previous turn, and you're like, oh man, I'm going to lose 4, they're going to gain 4 lore next turn with this one, and it's going to be really hard to remove. I can just, instead, I'm going to play my Maleficent and I'm going to get rid of it, and I don't want them to gain that 4 lore. So could be really strong there, and that is the end of the cards that we're going to look over. There's more cards if you guys want me to do more of those and my thoughts on those. We'll probably do those as we get more official like deck lists and everything else, but really, really interesting to see how this game develops. I'm happy to see how it plays, and honestly, from me who's been playing a lot of like Dragon Ball Super, it does seem to lend a lot to those kind of players, which is really cool. A little bit less of like Digimon and One Piece, and it's going to be really cool to see what this game kind of develops into. So that's going to be it for me. Again, thank you guys for watching. If you guys want me to have more Lorcana content in the next couple of weeks, let me know. I'll try to do my best to make some time to make those if you guys want that, and that should be it for me. So again, thank you so much for watching. I do appreciate it, and I'll catch you all next time.